Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into something I think we all wrestle with. Like, how do we really learn to trust God, and let go of worries?
Yeah,
It's tough, right?
absolutely.
So you sent in this incredibly powerful piece about faith,
Mm-hmm.
and it just resonated with me because it's all about surrender, surrendering our anxieties, and really learning to lean into God's plan for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy to get caught up when life throws those curveballs and we start thinking, what if this or what if that? But this piece is such a beautiful reminder that we're not alone in those moments.
Right.
We have someone amazing who's walking with us through it all. So we've got an expert here to help us unpack some of the wisdom in this source and to kind of figure out how we can actually apply these truths to our everyday anxieties. Welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah.
I think what's so compelling about this piece is how it just dives right into the heart of the matter,
Hmm.
the concept of surrender.
Yeah.
It's not just about acknowledging God.
Right.
It's about actively letting go of those burdens that we carry and trusting Him to carry them for us.
Yeah.
And it connects it beautifully to Matthew 11:28-30,
Mm.
where Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.
That image of laying down our burdens is so powerful.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, sometimes I struggle with even identifying what those burdens are.
Mm-hmm.
They're like this invisible weight that I'm carrying around, and I don't even know what they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think we all experience that.
yeah.
And the source goes into some really practical ways to kind of pinpoint those anxieties. And it all starts with prayer.
Okay.
But it's not just about, reciting memorized words or going through the motions.
Right.
It's about consciously bringing those worries to God.
Yeah.
Like almost like you're having a conversation with a close friend.
I love that analogy because when you think about it, if you were going through something difficult, you wouldn't just hand your friend a list of problems and say, here you go, fix these.
Right.
You would talk it through with them. You would process it together. And the source emphasizes that we don't have to do this alone,
Right.
right? It brings in Galatians 6.2, which talks about bearing one another's burdens.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's about finding that support within a community of faith. We're not meant to carry these burdens in isolation.
Yeah.
Sharing them with others, whether it's a trusted friend, a mentor, a spiritual leader, it allows us to receive encouragement,
Yeah.
to find strength in those shared experiences.
And I think it's that shared strength, that sense of community that prepares us for what I think is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to trusting God,
Mm-hmm.
surrendering control,
Yes.
embracing his timing.
Oh, and that's a big one.
This one is huge EE for me. I'm a planner.
Yeah.
I like to have things figured out.
Yeah.
And this source just really challenges that need for control.
That's so relatable. I think a lot of us struggle with that. And the source uses this really striking analogy of being in a boat during a fierce storm.
Okay.
You're terrified. The waves are crashing, but if you trust the pilot, you'll reach your destination.
Okay, that just gave me chills.
Yeah.
Because it's like shifting our focus from the chaos surrounding us to the one who's steering the ship, right?
Exactly.
And I can't help but think of all those times when I've gotten so caught up in worrying about tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
that I completely missed the blessings of today.
It's almost like Matthew 6.25-2d7 was written specifically for us worriers.
Right.
It's that reminder from Jesus not to be consumed by anxieties about the future.
Yeah.
Each day has enough worries of its own.
Yeah, it really does.
And I think what's so beautiful about this source is how it emphasizes that when we release those future anxieties, we actually open ourselves up to truly experiencing the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
Those little joys that we often miss when we're consumed by worry.
When you put it that way, it's almost as if worry becomes this barrier
Yeah.
between us and the blessings that are right in front of us. We're so fixated on what might happen
Right.
that we miss what is happening. And
Yeah.
it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. And it beautifully segues into the next powerful concept the source unpacks. Trusting in God's provision.
Okay.
Philippians 4.19 assures us that God will meet all our needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just this vague promise.
Right.
It's a promise that's been proven time and time again throughout history,
Mm.
even in the most dire circumstances.
And the source doesn't just tell us to trust in God's provision. It actually shows us through this incredible story, the
Yeah.
story of the widow of Zarephath from 1 Kings 17.
Oh, well, yes.
Here's this woman. She's literally down to her last bit of food,
Right.
preparing what she believes to be her final meal with her son.
Yeah.
And then the prophet Elijah comes along and asks her to provide for him first.
Can you imagine being in her shoes?
Oh, my goodness.
It would seem completely illogical to give away your last morsel.
Right. You're facing starvation.
Exactly. But she chooses to trust God. And what happens?
Yeah.
Her meager resources are miraculously multiplied.
Talk about a leap of faith.
Right.
Right.
But the source makes this powerful point. It's about trusting not in what we see with our limited human perspective,
Right.
but in what God can do with his limitless power.
Yes.
And that, my friend, is where prayer becomes so crucial.
Absolutely.
It's like the key that unlocks that deeper level of trust.
Mhm.
Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. And it's not just about asking for things, right?
That's right.
It's about cultivating that intimate connection with God, that direct line of communication where we can pour out our hearts,
Yeah.
lay down our fears.
And just receive his peace in return.
Yes.
It's like that verse in Philippians 4:6-7. Don't worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God.
Yeah.
And then what happens? We experience that peace that transcends all understanding.
That surpasses all understanding.
But I have a question for you. Is this peace just a feeling,
That is a great question.
or is it something deeper? It's a great question. And this is where the source really kind of goes beyond just the surface.
Okay.
It doesn't talk about peace as just this fleeting emotion,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
It points to John 14:27, where Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives."
Mm-hmm.
So it's not superficial.
You're right.
It's not a circumstantial peace, but a peace that's rooted in something much deeper,
Yeah.
something eternal.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
So it's a peace that isn't dependent on our circumstances, right?
Uh-huh.
A peace that can exist even in the midst of chaos. And it makes me think of that incredible story in Mark 4.3541, where Jesus is asleep in the boat during this raging storm,
Mhm.
and the disciples are panicking, but he's completely at peace.
It's almost as if he's embodying that peace
Yeah.
that he promises to give us.
Right.
And when the disciples wake him up, terrified, he simply calms the wind and the waves with a word.
It's just this powerful reminder that even when things seem out of control around us,
Mhm.
God is still in control. He's still present. He's still working. And that brings to mind Philippians 4.8, where Paul encourages us to focus our minds on whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable. It's like we have a choice.
Yeah.
We can either dwell on the anxieties, the what ifs, or we can choose to focus on what is good, what is true, what is God honoring.
And that's where gratitude comes in, right?
Yes.
It's not just about thinking positive thoughts. It's about actively cultivating a spirit of thankfulness, even in the midst of challenging circumstances.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our perspective from what we lack to what we already have.
Mhm.
And in doing so, inviting God's peace into our hearts.
It's like we're training our minds to see the good, to recognize God's blessings, and to trust that He's working even when we can't see it.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's almost like a muscle we need to exercise.
Yeah.
The more we practice gratitude, the more we become aware of God's presence in our lives.
So-
And that awareness, in turn, strengthens our faith and deepens our trust. Which brings us to another crucial aspect of this journey, accepting uncertainty.
Oh, man, this is a big one. I think we all grapple with this to some degree.
Yeah.
It's human nature to crave certainty.
Right.
We want to know what's coming next.
Yeah.
But faith requires us to step into the unknown, to trust that God is leading us even when we can't see the path ahead.
The source tackles this head-on using Proverbs 3.5-6 as a guide. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. It's a powerful reminder that we don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
We just need to trust the one who does.
It's like that analogy of a traveler on an unfamiliar road.
Right.
You might not know what's around each bend,
Mm-hmm.
but if you trust your guide, you can keep moving forward with confidence. But here's the million-dollar question. How do we actually live this way?
Yeah.
How do we embrace uncertainty without letting fear just completely paralyze us?
This is where the source gets really practical.
Okay, good.
It talks about taking those initial steps of faith,
Mm-hmm.
even when it feels scary.
Hmm.
It emphasizes the importance of seeking guidance through prayer, recognizing that we're not in this alone.
Yeah.
And perhaps most importantly, it encourages us to release the need for control.
That's so profound because it's about surrendering that illusion of control, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging that we're not the ones calling the shots. It's a humbling process for sure.
It is.
But the source suggests that this surrender ultimately leads to a deeper sense of peace.
It does. It's like we're finally free from that burden of trying to orchestrate every little detail of our lives.
Mm.
And this surrender, this willingness to let go of our own plans, beautifully connects to the next theme, obedience.
You know, obedience is often seen as this rigid, rule-following aspect of faith.
Right.
But the source frames it so beautifully as an act of trust. Deuteronomy 5.33 tells us to walk in obedience to God's commands so that we may live well and prosper. But what does that actually look like in our everyday lives?
Obedience often requires us to let go of our own desires, our own carefully crafted plans,
Yeah.
and align ourselves with God's will, even when it doesn't make sense from our limited human perspective.
Right.
And the source provides a powerful example. Abraham, in Genesis 12:1, God calls him to leave everything he knows, his homeland, his family, his comfort and journey to this unknown land.
It's like taking a leap of faith into the unknown.
Yeah.
But what's striking is that Abraham doesn't question God.
No.
He doesn't demand a detailed itinerary.
Right.
He simply obeys.
Yeah.
And it's through his obedience that God's promises unfold, not only for Abraham, but for generations to come.
And that's what the source emphasizes.
Yeah.
Obedience isn't about blind following. It's about staying aligned with God's purposes, trusting that he's leading us towards something greater, even when we can't see the destination.
It's like we're saying, okay, God, I trust you. I don't have all the answers, but I believe you do, and I'm willing to follow your lead. And that kind of trust requires a whole lot of patience, doesn't it?
It does.
Because let's be honest, sometimes God's timing feels like an eternity.
It does. Isaiah 40.3:1 paints such a vivid picture of those who wait on the Lord.
Okay.
But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Waiting on God isn't passive. It's an active process of trust and growth.
The source uses the story of Joseph to illustrate this.
Yes.
And it's such a powerful example of how God can work through even the most painful circumstances. Joseph endures years of hardship, betrayal by his brothers, false accusations, imprisonment. Yet through it all, God is orchestrating this plan that ultimately saves countless lives.
It's like God is saying, trust me, I'm working behind the scenes, even when you can't see it. And the source points out that that waiting period, it's not a time to sit idly by. It's a time to actively seek God's presence, to draw strength from his promises, and to allow him to work in our hearts.
Okay. We've talked about surrender, trusting in God's timing, believing in his provision, the power of prayer, embracing uncertainty, and the importance of obedience and patience. That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is.
So what does it all mean? How do we actually live with that deep, abiding trust in God's plan?
This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Exactly.
It's not just about understanding these concepts, but about putting them into practice. And the source brings us back to that beautiful promise in Jeremiah 29:1. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. Living with trust is about embracing this promise,
Yeah.
believing that even when things feel chaotic or uncertain, God is working for our good.
It's like shifting our perspective from why is this happening to me
Yeah.
to what is God doing through this? And it makes me think of Joseph's words in Genesis 50.20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good.
What an incredible statement.
It's like he's acknowledging that even though his brothers betrayed him, God used that pain for a greater purpose.
It's such a powerful testament to the truth that God's ways are higher than our ways, and connects perfectly to Romans 8.28,
Yeah.
which assures us that God works all things together for good,
For those who love him.
for those who love him, yes.
That's a verse I need to write on my heart.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when we don't understand what's happening, we can trust that God is working behind the scenes, weaving this tapestry of grace and redemption. And the source points out that reflecting on those past moments of God's faithfulness can be incredibly powerful.
It is. It's not about dwelling on the past, but about remembering how God has come through for us before, how he's been faithful to his promises. And those memories, those testimonies, not only strengthen our own faith, but also inspire others to trust in God as well. It's almost like those stories become these anchors, that we can hold on to when the storms of life hit, they remind us that God has been faithful before,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll be faithful again.
It's like Psalm 77:11. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago.
Yes.
Remembering and reflecting on those moments. It's an act of worship, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
And it deepens our connection with God. It reminds us of his unwavering faithfulness.
It's not just about remembering those big, dramatic miracles, though.
Right.
The Source also encourages us to notice those everyday blessings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those little moments where God's provision or guidance is evident?
Yeah.
It even suggests keeping a gratitude journal.
Oh, I love that idea.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in journaling.
Right?
And sometimes it's those small, seemingly insignificant moments that end up having the biggest impact on our hearts.
Absolutely. It's about training ourselves to recognize God's hand at work
Yeah.
in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
And as we become more attuned to those blessings, our trust deepens. We find ourselves worrying less, relying on God more.
It all circles back to the core theme of this deep dive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Letting go of worry and embracing trust in God's plan. The Source really challenges us to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Mm-hmm.
What are we still carrying that we can surrender to God? How can we apply these principles of trust in our daily lives?
Those are questions we need to wrestle with, you know.
Yeah.
Honestly, consistently. It's not a one-time decision. It's an ongoing journey of surrender, faith, and reliance on God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a journey that's unique to each individual. You know what might surrender look like for you in your current situation?
Yeah.
What anxieties are you holding on to that you can release to God?
That's such a good point. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to living out this trust.
Right.
But the Source does offer some really practical guidance. It talks about making those conscious choices to prioritize prayer, to seek support within the community of faith, to actively cultivate gratitude.
And it's important to remember that this journey won't always be easy.
Right.
There will be times when doubts creep in, when fear threatens to overwhelm us, when we question whether God is really in control.
Yeah.
But those are the very moments when we need to cling even tighter to the promises of God, to remind ourselves of his faithfulness in the past, and to draw strength from his word.
It's about choosing faith over fear, even when it feels difficult. And the Source reminds us that we don't have to do this alone, right?
Right.
We have the Holy Spirit as our guide and comforter, and we have the support of our brothers and sisters in Christ.
What's so beautiful about this journey is that as we grow in trust, we also grow in our understanding of God's character. We begin to see his love, his faithfulness, and his power more clearly.
Yeah.
And that deepens our relationship with him, leading to an even greater sense of peace and purpose.
It's this incredible cycle.
Yeah.
The more we trust, the more we experience his goodness.
Right.
And the more we experience his goodness, the more we're empowered to trust. And that trust then overflows into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
Our relationships, our work, our decision-making.
Absolutely.
It becomes the very foundation on which we build our lives.
And the Source emphasizes this isn't just about our own personal well-being either.
Yeah.
It's about becoming conduits of God's peace and grace to others.
Hmm.
As we live out this trust, it inspires those around us.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them permission to kind of let go of their own anxieties and embrace the truth that God is in control.
It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Our transformed lives then have the power to transform others, to point them toward the source of true peace and hope. And the Source reminds us that our struggles, our journeys through uncertainty, they can become these testimonies
Right.
that encourage others.
Sharing our stories of how God has worked in our lives can be so powerful. It gives others permission to be vulnerable, to acknowledge their own struggles, and to find hope in knowing they're not alone. And it also glorifies God, allowing us to point back to the one who has been faithful time and time again.
There's something profoundly beautiful about that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Acknowledging that even in the midst of our human weakness and imperfections, God can use our lives to bring about his purposes.
It's truly humbling to realize that we don't have to have it all figured out,
Yeah,
that we don't have to be perfect to be used by God.
right.
He can take our brokenness, our struggles, and weave them into his incredible tapestry of grace and redemption.
It all goes back to that fundamental truth, doesn't it? It's not about us, it's about him.
Yeah.
And when we surrender to that reality, when we release our grip on control and embrace the freedom of trusting in his plan, we unlock this level of peace and joy that the world simply can't offer.
And this journey is available to everyone, no matter where you are in your faith, no matter what challenges you're facing. You can choose to step into this trust,
Yeah.
to let go of worry and embrace the truth that God is in control. And as you do, you'll discover that the weight of anxiety lifts, the burden of fear lightens, and a deep, abiding peace fills your heart.
What a beautiful promise.
Yeah.
And it's one we can hold on to even when life feels overwhelming. The invitation is there, isn't it?
It is.
To surrender our worries, embrace trust, and experience that transformative power of God's peace in our lives.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this.
It's been my pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into something amazing.
Yeah, until then.